Our top 6 science fiction and fantasy novels you should read. Hello and welcome back to Deep Dives with SmartBookWorms. I'm Megan, your virtual book guru host for today's show. Join me, Martina, Amanda, Christopher, Claire, and Nathan, my co-presenters and fellow virtual book gurus, as we dive deep into our top 6 science fiction and fantasy novels from authors you love to read. In today's episode, we'll be diving deep into 6 staggering books by 6 illustrious authors. 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Artemis by Andy Weir. Life, the Universe and Everything by Douglas Adams. Going Postal by Terry Pratchett. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows by J.K. Rowling. The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. So let's dive deep into today's deep dive. Our top 6 science fiction and fantasy novels from authors you love to read.
Hello, my fellow bookworms. Chris Stopper here to expound upon The 22nd of November 63 by Stephen King. It's seriously amazing. I know you're not always into his stuff, but this is different. It's not your typical horror, more like a historical time travel thriller with a really touching love story. It's the kind of book that makes you think, and it really got to me with its ending. So, the main character, Jake Epping, is an English teacher who discovers this portal that takes him back to 1963. He gets this wild idea that he can go back and stop the Kennedy assassination. It's not just about changing history, though. It's about what life was like back then and how different everything was. King does this incredible job of creating this whole world of the late 50s and early 60s. You feel like you're actually there with the music, the clothes, the cars, and all the little details. The book is super suspenseful, and you're constantly wondering if Jake's going to mess everything up. It's a real page-turner. He meets all these memorable characters, and you really root for them. There's this one guy, Harry Dunning, who was one of Jake's students in the present, and his story is heartbreaking. It's about how his life was completely altered by a horrible night when his father murdered his family. It really makes you think about how a single moment can change everything. And then there's Sadie, who is a librarian in the 60s town Jake settles in. She is just fantastic and becomes a big part of Jake's life. Their relationship is so sweet, but also kind of tragic because of the whole time travel thing. I was really invested in them, and their story definitely added an emotional depth to the book. The author himself noted that some reviewers saw optimism in his view of love after reading the book.
I found it really interesting how the book explores the idea of fate and how difficult it is to change the past. It's like the past is always trying to push back, and the smallest things can have huge consequences. It's not just a simple, go back and fix everything story. Jake learns the hard way that some things might be better left alone. There are several instances of how Jake's actions lead to harm or unexpected changes in the lives of people he meets in the past. There's also this really cool sense of place. Jake spends time in both Derry, Maine and Dallas, Texas. He describes Dallas as a malevolent place, which is kind of creepy. It makes you think about whether some places can be evil at certain times, but even in Dallas he encounters people who add to the richness of the story, like the group of expats he meets. He also spends time in Jody, Texas, which is depicted as a more idyllic, small-town setting. I also found the parts about the historical figures like Lee Harvey Oswald to be fascinating. The book really gets into the details of his life and how he became who he was. It also examines some of the conspiracy theories that still circulate around the Kennedy assassination, while ultimately concluding that Oswald acted alone. King's research is impressive. He references many sources he used to create the narrative, and it makes the story feel very real, even with the time travel element. You know, it made me think about what I'd do if I had a chance to go back and change something. It's definitely a book that sticks with you. It's also not overly long, but at the same time it does not feel short. It's quite a full read, but it goes fast because the narrative really hooks you. You've really got to check this one out. It's not just a thriller, it's a love story, a history lesson, and a really powerful exploration of the past. Let me know what you think after you read it.
Claire here to tell you why you absolutely have to read this book. Artemis by Andy Weir. It's a wild ride set on the moon, and I think you'd really get into it. So, the story's about this woman named Jaz Bashara, and she's basically a small-time smuggler/porter living in Artemis, which is this lunar city. It's not some sci-fi utopia, though. It's a real place with different social classes, people just trying to make a living, and, of course, a bunch of shady characters. Anyway, Jaz is trying to make some extra cash and gets mixed up in this crazy scheme to sabotage a mining operation. I know it sounds like a typical sci-fi plot, but trust me, it's way more than that. What's cool is how Weir builds this whole world. You get a sense of what life is like on the moon, from the dangers of the lunar dust to the daily routines and the different bubbles that make up the city. It's really immersive, like you're right there with Jaz dodging security and running from angry mobs. The science is pretty solid too, where it gets into the technical aspects of living on the moon, but doesn't make it too dense or boring. Jaz is a great character too. She's snarky and funny, but also smart and resourceful. You can't help but root for her, even when she makes some questionable decisions. She's not a hero in the traditional sense. She's flawed, but those flaws make her relatable. The supporting cast is great too, from her dad, who is a welder, to this shady businessman named Trond. Even the bad guys aren't just mustache-twirling villains. They've got their own motivations and agendas. The plot is a roller coaster, and it's paced so well that you don't want to put the book down. There are heists, smuggling operations, betrayals, and all sorts of crazy twists and turns. The tension is high, and you're never quite sure what's going to happen next. You also get a real sense of the high stakes involved, with the survival of the entire city at risk, because they depend on the oxygen that Sanchez aluminum produces. It's also funny. Jaz's internal monologue is hilarious, and she has some great one-liners that made me laugh out loud. Plus, there's a lot of witty banter between characters, especially with her frenemy Dale, who was her ex. This isn't a super serious book, even though the plot involves some big issues. Weir has a way of balancing the serious parts with lighter moments. And the ending is great. It's satisfying and leaves you with a sense of hope, but it also feels realistic and earned. It wraps things up nicely, while still leaving you wanting more. Here's what I think you'll especially enjoy. The unique setting. A bustling city on the moon is something you don't see in every sci-fi book. The fast-paced plot. It keeps you engaged from beginning to end. The witty humor. Jaz's internal monologue and the dialogue between the characters will keep you entertained. The morally gray characters. Nobody's perfect, and it makes them much more interesting. The combination of science and suspense. Weir makes you believe you are on the moon without sacrificing a good story. Seriously, you should add Artemis to your reading list. It's a fun, exciting, and surprisingly engaging book. I think it's right up your alley. You won't be disappointed.
Hi, it's Nathan to give you the lowdown on Life, the Universe and Everything by Douglas Adams. It's the third in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, and it's a wild ride. Seriously, if you're looking for something funny, absurd, and thought-provoking, this is it. Okay, so picture this. Arthur Dent, our hapless human protagonist, is living in a cave, having been alone for years, practicing speaking by talking to trees. Then, out of nowhere, this alien shows up, calls him a jerk, and then poof, Arthur's on another intergalactic adventure. This time, it involves a cricket match at Lord's, a Chesterfield sofa materializing out of thin air, and a bunch of robots who want to destroy the universe. I know, right? It turns out that Arthur's old pal, Ford Prefect, is back, and he's as delightfully weird as ever. He's been jumping in and out of a gin and tonic lake, apparently. He also claims to have been responsible for the evolved shape of the giraffe while in Africa. Ford insists that there's an art to flying, or rather a knack, that lies in learning how to throw yourself at the ground and miss. And of course, he still has the Hitchhiker's Guide, which is as unhelpful as ever. The main plot revolves around the planet Cricket, whose inhabitants are charming, delightful, intelligent, and also completely insane xenophobes. They can't cope with the idea of a universe outside their own, so they decide to destroy it. And they have a key to do it, the Wicket Key, composed of seemingly random items like a wooden pillar, a silver bale, and a perspex pillar. It's all so random and bizarre, it's hilarious.
You'll also meet a bunch of new characters like Slartibartfast, who is trying to prevent the cricket robots from using the key, who seems to be as annoyed and exasperated with everything as Arthur is. He ends up taking them on a journey to cricket to understand it all. There is also Agrajag, an entity who has been killed by Arthur in multiple past lives and now seeks revenge, whose descriptions are just insane. And this Marvin, the depressed robot, you've met him in the other books, he makes a brief appearance. Here's what makes this book so great. The absurd humour is top-notch. Adams has a way of taking the most ridiculous situations and making them seem perfectly normal. It's clever and witty. The dialogue is sharp and there are so many funny lines. It's also strangely thoughtful. The book touches on themes of free will, the nature of reality, and the meaning of life, or rather the lack thereof. The book is full of unexpected twists and turns. Just when you think you've got a handle on things, Adams throws you another curveball. The characters are unforgettable. Each one is quirky and weird, making them all relatable in their own way. There's a whole bit about the campaign for real time, which is trying to stop people from messing with the past, which is ironic, given the time travel throughout the book. Oh, and there is the ultimate party, where everyone has been for generations and nobody has left. It's a total mess. And don't even get me started on the explanation of the somebody else's problem field. It makes you look at the world differently. If you're looking for a book that will make you laugh out loud, scratch your head in confusion, and ponder the mysteries of the universe all at the same time, life, the universe, and everything is a must-read. Just go into it knowing you're in for a completely bonkers experience and you'll love it. Seriously, you'll be quoting it for weeks after.
Hey, it's Martina, and you have got to read this book I just finished. It's called Going Postal by Terry Pratchett. Seriously, you know how we love those Discworld books? This one is a total riot. It starts with this con man, Moist von Lipwig, who's about to be hanged, but Lord Vetinari, you know, the patrician, offers him a job instead. He can choose freedom or death, but the freedom comes with a catch. He has to take over the Ankh-Morpork post office. And this isn't your average post office. It's a total disaster, buried under mountains of pigeon droppings and completely dysfunctional. It's been ruined by hubris and greed and bloody stupid Johnson and the new pie. So, Moist, being the resourceful sort, starts to dig himself out of this mess, and that's where things get really funny. He's got this golem, Mr. Pump, as a bodyguard. Mr. Pump is a clay man who is incredibly literal and has some very old-fashioned morals and secret instructions from Lord Vetinari, which no one will tell Moist about. It turns out that Mr. Pump has a hidden directive, unless ordered to do so by duly constituted authority. Golems are also described as being highly moral. Moist also have to deal with a couple of quirky post office employees. There's Mr. Grote, an old guy who is obsessed with the post office's past glory and is terrified of bathing, and Stanley, who is completely, utterly obsessed with pins. The pin collector Stanley is described as having a beatific concentration, like a man dreaming with his eyes open. The whole thing is a battle between the old clack system, like a telegraph, which is run by the Grand Trunk Company and the post office. Moist wants to bring back the post office, and he starts by putting the metal letters back on the post office sign. The letters on the post office say, "Neither rain nor snow nor glow of night can stay these me's angers aboti their duty." And when Moist fixes the sign, it feels like a sign of hope. The Grand Trunk Company is run by Reacher Gilt, who is a total, over-the-top villain. He even has a cockatoo and an eye patch. Gilt believes that property is the foundation of freedom. It turns out he and his business partners are running a scam, and Lord Vetinari is keeping an eye on them. Vetinari is playing a game with a dwarf from Uberwald over the clack system, which is a valuable antique. Moist, along with a little help from some unexpected allies, starts to get the post office up and running again. There's a funny bit where he has to pass some sort of secret test with a bunch of robed postmen. It turns out there's a whole secret order of postmen who are dedicated to the old ways of the post office. There's even a mention of a new pie that has some significance. And the letters. Oh man, the letters. There is a whole world of letters, both written and unwritten, and they have a sort of life of their own. And then there's a race. Moist challenges the Grand Trunk Clacks system to a race to Genua. It is Moist's post office versus the Clacks to see who can deliver a message faster. Of course, Moist has a plan, but you'll have to read it to find out what it is. It involves some serious creative thinking, and maybe a little help from the gods, since the people start to think Moist is some sort of prophet, and he suddenly finds himself with $150,000 buried in a field. There's a lot of philosophical stuff in there too, about freedom and choice. Veterinary keeps saying, there is always a choice. He says that no practical definition of freedom would be completely without the freedom to take the consequences. Also, what is up with all the angel references? You need to read it. It's classic Pratchett. It's hilarious, clever, and has some really great characters. You won't be able to put it down.
Hi everybody, Amanda here to tell you why you have to read this book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Seriously, it's a wild ride from start to finish, and you won't believe everything that happens. First off, it kicks off with some seriously dark stuff. It's not all fun and games anymore. Voldemort is gaining power, and the Ministry is falling apart. It feels like the whole world is against Harry, and he has to go on the run. The first few chapters set the tone for the whole book. It's intense and emotional. It's not like the other books where they're safe at Hogwarts. There is danger lurking everywhere. One of the biggest things that happens early on is the reveal of a new biography about Dumbledore by Rita Skeeter, of all people. This book is full of shocking revelations about Dumbledore's past. It talks about his murky past, his family, and his relationship with Grindelwald. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about Dumbledore and his motivations. You know how we've always thought of Dumbledore as this perfect, wise wizard. Well, this book throws all that into question, and you'll be wondering if you really knew him at all. It's really hard to know what to believe. There's even stuff about Dumbledore's relationship with Harry and how it wasn't normal. It's juicy stuff, even if it's from Skeeter. And then there's the mystery of the Deathly Hallows. We get introduced to this idea through The Tale of the Three Brothers, which is this story about the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak. It starts to seem like these objects are more than just a fairy tale. It adds a whole new layer to the plot. This takes Harry, Ron, and Hermione on another quest, but it's much more dangerous this time around because they are out in the open with no support from the Order of the Phoenix or Dumbledore. The book also explores deeper into the relationship between Harry, Ron, and Hermione. They get into some serious arguments about what their next move is and their fears for the future. Ron even leaves for a bit. There are serious loyalty tests, and you'll be wondering how their friendship is going to make it through this trial. But it's also really touching to see how much they mean to each other. You'll really root for them. And the action, it is non-stop. There's a daring break-in at the Ministry, a terrifying escape from Malfoy Manor, and the intense Gringotts heist. These scenes are incredibly intense, and you'll be on the edge of your seat. Then there's the Battle of Hogwarts, which is intense and emotional because there are some major losses. You will be crying. There are also some pretty emotional moments, like when Harry reads a letter from his mother and when Dobby dies. These moments are incredibly powerful and heartbreaking, and it feels like you're experiencing these things with Harry. You'll also find yourself sympathizing with some characters you might not have expected, like Snape. You learn his true motivations for everything he did, and it will shock you. Honestly, this book is an emotional roller coaster. It's dark, it's action-packed, and it will make you question everything you thought you knew about the wizarding world. You will not be disappointed, and you'll be thinking about it long after you've finished it. You have to read it.
Last but by no means least, we have The Lord of the Rings, which tells the story of a quest to destroy the One Ring, a powerful artifact, and the fellowship formed to aid in this perilous journey. The story includes hobbits, elves, dwarves, and men who struggle against the dark forces of Mordor. Hey, you've got to read this book, The Lord of the Rings. It's not just a book, it's a whole world, a massive story, and honestly, it's been a total experience. It's by J.R.R. Tolkien, and it's often called a trilogy, but it's actually one big novel, divided into 6 books, plus a bunch of appendices. First off, it's about this place called Middle-earth, where hobbits, elves, dwarves, and humans all live, and there's this dark lord, Sauron, trying to take over everything. The main story kicks off with this hobbit named Frodo Baggins, who inherits this powerful ring that Sauron desperately wants. This isn't just any ring, it's the One Ring, and it can control all the others. So Frodo has to go on this epic quest to destroy it, and it becomes a huge adventure with tons of twists and turns. The book is divided into 3 volumes, each containing 2 books. The first volume, The Fellowship of the Ring, introduces Frodo and his hobbit friends, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. They start in their peaceful home, the Shire, but quickly get pulled into this dangerous quest. They meet a mysterious ranger called Strider, who turns out to be a key figure, and have encounters with elves, including the wise Elrond. By the end, they form the Fellowship to take the ring to Mordor. The Two Towers is where things get really intense. The Fellowship breaks apart. Merry and Pippin are captured by orcs, while Frodo and Sam continue their journey, but they now have the very creepy Gollum as a guide. It's where we learn more about the world and its conflicts, and see some truly epic battles. There's a lot of political intrigue and the introduction of other major characters like Treebeard, the Ent. Finally, in The Return of the King, everything culminates in a massive war. We see huge battles, including the siege of Minas Tirith and the final confrontation with Sauron. We learn that Strider is actually Aragorn, the heir to the throne of Gondor, and his story is just as gripping as Frodo's. And of course, there's a resolution to Frodo's quest. What makes this book special is the depth of the world Tolkien created. It's not just about good versus evil. There are layers upon layers of history, languages, and cultures. He invented entire languages for the elves and other peoples. The details are amazing, even down to the family trees of the hobbits. You really feel like you're immersed in this living, breathing world. It's just like how the author himself described the world evolving as he wrote the story. The author's son, Christopher Tolkien, really helped to make this book even more impressive by collecting and publishing his father's notes. It's like you can see the story growing and changing as Tolkien himself created it. For example, you can see how the characters evolved and how the ring's power became more complex. You can even look at some of Tolkien's illustrations in the manuscripts. Tolkien put so much care into the text itself. It's wild to think that even after the book was first published, he was still making corrections and revisions, trying to get every word and detail just right. There were so many small changes made over the years, with some people finding errors that had existed for decades. Some of the errors were just printers' mistakes, and some were misinterpretations of Tolkien's invented words. It's something that Tolkien himself cared a lot about. He didn't like when people would change his made-up words. It's a book that can be interpreted in many ways, and Tolkien himself said that people have all kinds of different opinions and interpretations. He had a lot of different duties and interests, including his teaching, and the book took years to create, and even after he completed it, he had to revise and rewrite the whole story. The story just took over and grew over time. You might find some parts are slower or denser, especially when Tolkien goes into detail about history or languages, but it all adds to the overall richness of the story. It really enhances the book, making it feel so immersive. Honestly, I think you'd love The Lord of the Rings. It's more than just a fantasy story. It's about friendship, courage, and the struggle between good and evil, and how small people can make a big difference. Plus, it's got all the elements we love in a good adventure.
magic, battles, and unforgettable characters. Let me know if you decide to pick it up. We can totally talk about it.
And there you have it, 6 staggering books by 6 illustrious authors. Chris Stauffer introduced us to Jake Epping as he travels back in time to prevent the Kennedy assassination, but discovers that changing the past has unforeseen consequences for his own life. He also grapples with the moral implications of his actions. Claire gave us the insight into J.R.R, a smuggler on the moon, who gets caught in a conspiracy involving a powerful corporation and a secret technology, forcing her to fight for her city's future. Nathan told us how Arthur Dent and friends get caught up in the cricket wars, encountering robots, a party, and a silver award, while trying to save the universe. Martina expanded upon Moist von Lipwig, a con artist, who is forced to revive Ankh-Morpork's postal service and defeat the corrupt clack system while dealing with talking letters, golems, and responsibility. And Amanda gave us the lowdown on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, which follows Harry, Ron, and Hermione as they search for Horcruxes to defeat Voldemort, uncovering secrets about Dumbledore's past and facing difficult choices. Have you read any? If so, drop a comment below and let us know what you thought. And if you haven't, do they sound like a must-read for you? If you enjoyed today's deep dive, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more book deep dives, and share this video with your fellow book lovers. Don't forget that full in-depth reviews are available from our free 100 science fiction and fantasy novels you should read. See the link in the description below to grab your copy today. And until next time on Deep Dives with Smart Bookworms, keep reading, keep growing, and we'll see you in the next one.